There are decisions that change a farm, and there are decisions that burn every bridge behind you. Beckett Ashford made that second kind. But before the burning, before the bridges, before the fleet of red machines that would reshape his operation and divide his county, there was a single moment that told the whole story. September, 3 months after it all began, 4 in the morning. The machine shed lit by humming fluorescent tubes that cast everything in pale blue. 9 John Deere tractors lined up like soldiers awaiting orders that would never come. Beckett stood at the end of the row, 49 years old, calloused hands hanging at his sides, and touched the hood of his 8R. The green paint was cold under his palm. He knew every scratch on that machine, every hour it had logged, every field it had opened. He had bought it from the same dealership where his name hung on a bronze plaque in the showroom lobby. This was the last time he would look at these machines as his own. But that part of the story was still 3 months away. To understand why Beckett Ashford sold every piece of green iron he owned, you have to go back to a wheat field on June 14th and a sound that changed everything. Beckett farmed 2,400 acres of winter wheat and registered Angus cattle 12 miles outside McCook, Nebraska. The land sat between the Republican River Valley and rolling plains that turned gold every June and held that color until the combines came through. It was third-generation ground. His grandfather Theron broke it with a Ford 8N in 1952, turning buffalo grass into furrows with a tractor that had less horsepower than a modern riding mower. His father Grady expanded it through the 70s and 80s with international harvesters, adding quarter sections when neighbors retired and nobody's kids wanted to farm. Beckett took over in 1998 and built it into something bigger than both of them combined. 2,400 acres of dry land and irrigated wheat, 800 acres of corn and soybeans in rotation, and a registered Angus herd of 240 head that calved every February in weather that could kill a newborn calf in 20 minutes if you weren't watching. All of it ran on John Deere Green. 9 tractors, 2S Series combines a lineup of planters, sprayers, grain carts, and implements worth $3.2 million. Some of it financed. Most of it bought outright over 2 decades of good years and careful decisions. Every machine carried the Leaping Deer logo. Every service record came from the same dealership in McCook. His wife Loretta kept the books. She was 46, a former accountant who had worked at a firm in town before their second kid was born, and the farm needed her more than the firm did. Loretta was the one who knew exactly how much each machine still owed, what every acre produced per dollar invested, and where the cash flow stood on any given Tuesday. When Beckett wanted to buy something, Loretta's answer was always the same. Show me the numbers first. Every Sunday night, they sat at the kitchen table with a laptop and a legal pad. Beckett read off acre counts and fuel receipts. Loretta entered them into a spreadsheet she had been building for 16 years. They were not romantic in the way movies show romance. They were romantic in the way two people who have pulled the same weight for 2 decades without stopping can be. They trusted each other with the thing that mattered most, which was the operation that fed their family and paid for their land and gave their lives a shape that made sense. The dealership was called Nordine Equipment. It had sold Deere iron in southwest Nebraska since 1971, when Barrett Nordine opened the doors with a parts counter, a service bay, and a handshake that meant more than any contract. Barrett was 78 now, retired in name but not in habit. He still showed up every Monday morning, sat in the buying office with a cup of black coffee, and watched the operation his son Vance had taken over. He didn't interfere, but everyone who worked there knew he was watching, and everyone who bought from there knew that Barrett Nordine remembered your name, your wife's name, your kids' names, and probably your dog's name too. Beckett's father Grady had bought Nordine's first 4020 tractor back in 1973. Beckett himself bought his first 8R there in 2009. When the dealership expanded in 2015, added a new service wing and a showroom that smelled like fresh concrete and new rubber, Vance Nordine had Beckett's name put on a bronze dedication plaque in the lobby, not because Beckett asked, because Vance insisted. Your family, Vance had said, shaking Beckett's hand in front of 30 people at the ribbon cutting. This place doesn't exist without guys like you. Beckett believed that. He believed it for 8 years. Vance was 44, the general manager, Barrett's son and heir to the Nordine name. He had grown up in the service bays, sweeping floors at 12, running parts at 15, selling his first tractor at 22. He knew the business the way sons of founders know businesses, which is thoroughly but sometimes without the hunger that built it. He and Beckett were not just dealer and customer. They played on the same Farm Bureau softball team, Beckett at first base, Vance in the outfield. Their kids went to the same school. On summer weekends, they would sometimes run into each other at the municipal pool in McCook, their wives talking on the deck chairs while the kid cannonballed off the diving board, and the two men would stand in the shallow end discussing planting schedules and equipment upgrades like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because it was. When Beckett's 6M tractor broke down during planting in 2018, Vance had done something that cemented their relationship in a way no contract ever could. He loaned Beckett a replacement and at no charge. Drove it over himself on a Saturday afternoon, left it in Beckett's yard with the keys in the ignition, and said, "Pay me back when I need something." Beckett remembered that. He remembered the ease of it, the way Vance had waved off the paperwork like it was nothing, the way he had leaned against the fender of his truck and talked for 20 minutes about the new precision planting systems coming out, not selling, just talking, two men who trusted each other enough to share opinions without agendas. That memory would become a weapon later turned back on both of them in a conversation neither one wanted to have. But in the spring of 2018, it was simply proof of what Beckett already believed, that Nordine equipment was family, that the relationship between a farmer and his dealer was built on something deeper than transactions. But in June of 2023, none of that history mattered. What mattered was wheat. June 14th, the second day of harvest, the kind of day that defines a year in wheat country. Clear skies from horizon to horizon, humidity so low your lips cracked by noon, and a 14-hour cutting window where every single minute had a dollar sign attached to it. Beckett was running his 2020 John Deere S78 combined through a 340-acre section north of the highway. Cutting at 4.2 miles per hour, grain tank filling every 11 minutes, the header swallowing 30-foot swaths of golden winter wheat and feeding them into the threshing system with the steady roar that every wheat farmer knows in his bones. Then the machine lurched. Not a hiccup, not a momentary stumble. The entire drivetrain locked. The header stopped mid-cut, stalks of wheat pinched and bent under the suddenly frozen mechanism. Alarms screamed across the cab display, red warnings cascading down the touchscreen like a slot machine paying out in disasters. Beckett killed the engine. The silence that followed was the loudest sound he had ever heard in a wheat field. He climbed down and opened the side access panel. The smell hit him first. Burnt transmission fluid, hot metal, something chemical and final. The CVT transmission had destroyed itself. Metal fragments embedded in housing that was never supposed to crack. Shrapnel from gears that had sheared apart. Fluid pooling on the stubble beneath the machine like dark blood from a wound that couldn't be closed. This was not wear and tear. This was not the result of 20 years of hard use. This was a manufacturing defect, a flaw that had passed through quality control and sat dormant inside a $380,000 machine, waiting for the worst possible moment to announce itself. Beckett stood in the middle of a wheat field that stretched to the horizon in every direction, golden ripe ready, wind moving through it in slow waves like the land was breathing. A perfect harvest day, and his combine sat dead at his feet, leaking fluid onto ground that was supposed to be producing income. He looked north, then south, then east. 1,800 acres of winter wheat still standing. Every day it stayed in the field, the grain lost moisture and test weight. Every day the weather window held was one day closer to the day it wouldn't. He pulled out his phone and called Nordine Equipment. Vance didn't answer. The service manager did. "We'll get someone out there tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow," Beckett said. "I've got 1,800 acres of wheat standing. I need this fixed today." "Beckett, you're slammed. Everyone's harvesting. I'll bump you up the list, but tomorrow's the earliest." The technician arrived 26 hours later. He opened the panel, looked at the transmission, whistled and shook his head. The diagnosis took less than a minute. Full replacement. Parts from Germany. 3 weeks, if lucky, 6 if not. $47,300 plus labor. Beckett felt the air leave his chest. $47,000. 3 to 6 weeks in the middle of harvest. He called Vance directly. Got him on the second ring this time. "Vance, I need you to do something. I need this expedited. I don't care what it costs. Rush shipping, overtime, whatever it takes. I need that combine running." Vance's voice was sympathetic, professional, and distant in a way Beckett had never heard before. "Beckett, I hear you. But we don't control the supply chain. Deere says 3 weeks minimum. I can't make parts appear out of thin air." Beckett played his card, the one he had been holding without knowing he was holding it. "Vance, when my $6 million went down in 2018, you loaned me a machine. No charge. You said pay me back when I need something. I need something now." The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. Beckett counted them. "Beckett, in 2018, I had a machine sitting idle. Right now, everything we've got is running. I don't have anything to loan you." Then Vance offered him a rental. A used S760 available for the season. $315 an hour. Beckett did the math in his head while Vance talked about availability and scheduling. 1,800 acres. 140 hours of runtime at his usual pace. $44,100. Nearly the same cost as the repair, except the repair kept his asset. The rental just bled him dry and left him with nothing. "I'll think about it," Beckett said. He hung up. He stood in his shop for a long time after that call. The S780 sat outside dead, $250,000 of precision engineering, reduced to a lawn ornament by a part that cost less than a good saddle. On the wall above his workbench hung a framed photo from the 2015 Nordine Equipment grand opening, Beckett and Vance standing side by side in front of the new showroom, both of them grinning, both of them holding the oversized scissors they had used to cut the ribbon. Next to the photo, the miniature bronze plaque Vance had given him as a gift, a replica of the one in the showroom lobby. Beckett Ashford, it read. A Nordine customer since 1973. Since 1973. His father's year. Not his. The plaque credited a relationship that predated Beckett's own involvement, as if the loyalty belonged to the bloodline rather than the man. He looked at that plaque and felt something shift, not anger, not yet. Something quieter. The recognition that he had been paying for a relationship with his wallet for 15 years and had just discovered that the relationship had a return policy he hadn't read. That night, the kitchen table. Loretta sitting across from him with the laptop open, the spreadsheet glowing in the dim light of the overhead fixture. Beckett told her the numbers. She ran them 3 different ways. Each way came out ugly. Rent the combine, we lose $44,000 and keep nothing. Fix hours, we lose $47,000 and wait 3 to 6 weeks with no second machine. But Beckett, she said, looking at him over the top of the screen, we don't have 47,000 in cash right now, not without pulling from the reserve fund. Beckett told her he would find another way. Loretta closed the laptop halfway. Another way, like what? Pray for the transmission to fix itself. It wasn't a fight, it was two people staring at the same math and finding no answer that didn't hurt. Loretta went to bed, Beckett stayed. He opened the laptop and started searching. Not for Deere parts, not for rental combines, not for any of the solutions that kept him inside the green ecosystem he had lived in his entire farming life. He searched for something else entirely. He pulled up videos, forums, performance reports. He read about brands he had never seriously considered. Case IH New Holland, Fendt, Massey Ferguson. Massey Ferguson kept appearing. Not because of slick marketing or sponsored content, because of testimonies from farmers who had no reason to lie. Operators in Australia running MF Ideal combines through canola at ground speeds that should have been impossible. Wheat farmers in North Dakota posting fuel efficiency numbers that made his Deere consumption look wasteful, and a parts supply chain that didn't require waiting for a specialized unit to ship from a factory in Germany. At 1 in the morning, Loretta walked through the kitchen on her way to get water. She stopped behind him and looked at the screen. What are you doing? Researching, or thinking about something reckless. Beckett didn't turn around. On the screen, a video played silently. A red and silver combine cutting through a wheat field somewhere in Manitoba. Massey Ferguson, Loretta said. We have never run anything that wasn't green. Beckett watched the combine on the screen make a turn at the end of the row, smooth and precise. Maybe that's the problem, he said. Loretta got her water and went back to bed. Beckett stayed at the table until 2 in the morning, reading and watching and doing the kind of research that doesn't feel like research. It feels like the first stage of a decision that has already been made somewhere deeper than the conscious mind, a decision the body knows before the brain catches up. At 7 the next morning, he called a number he had never dialed before. Heartland, Iron Kearney, Nebraska. 83 miles northeast. He had driven past it 100 times and never looked twice. A man named Virgil Hollowell answered. Sales manager. Voice like gravel, poured over sandpaper tone like he had been selling equipment long enough to know that time spent on small talk was time wasted. Heartland Iron, this is Virgil. Yeah, hi. I'm looking for information on your ideal combine line. You farming or custom cutting? Farming. Wheat and cattle. 2,400 acres. I've got a Deere S78. Oh, that just blew its transmission mid-harvest. I need a replacement. You need a rental replacement or a buy replacement? Beckett hesitated. I am not sure yet. Virgil didn't push. He also didn't waste the opening. Let me make it easier. I've got a 2022 Ideal 9 sitting on the lot right now. Demo unit, 340 horsepower, 450 bushel tank, low hours. It'll outcut your S780 and burn 18% less fuel doing it. You want to come see it? Beckett asked why he should drive 83 miles when he had a Deere dealer in town. Virgil was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped the sales cadence entirely. You know what I hate most about this industry? When a dealer forgets that harvest doesn't wait for anyone. You drive down here, I'll show you something. How much? Beckett asked. $385,000, but it's end a quarter and I'm motivated. I'll work with you. Something shifted in Beckett's chest, a feeling he couldn't name. Not excitement, not hope. Something more, like the moment you realize the door you've been leaning against isn't locked. It's just closed, and you can open it anytime you want. I'll be there in 2 hours, Beckett said. The Ideal 9 sat in the Heartland Iron lot like it had been waiting for him. Red and silver aggressive lines, a machine that looked like it had been designed by people who understood that a combine isn't just a tool. It's the difference between a good year and a disaster. Virgil walked him through it methodically. The single-rotor threshing system, simpler than the twin-rotor design Beckett was used to. Fewer moving parts meant fewer failure points. The concave geometry was different, designed to thresh more aggressively with less mechanical complexity. The grain tank was bigger. The cab layout was cleaner. The hydraulic response was faster than anything Beckett had felt in 15 years of running Deere equipment. Then Virgil said the thing that stuck. You know what the difference is between us and your Deere dealer? When you call us, we answer. When you need parts, we have them. We don't make you wait 3 weeks because some algorithm at corporate decided you're not a priority customer. He let that sit. Then he said something no Deere dealer had ever said to Beckett in 30 years. Take it home. Run it through your wheat. If it doesn't outperform your Deere, bring it back. No questions. No restocking fee. No paperwork. Beckett stared at him. You're serious. I don't sell machines, Virgil said. I sell proof. Beckett called Loretta from the parking lot. His voice sounded strange even to himself. Steady, but with something underneath the steadiness that she would recognize. You're gonna kill me, he said, but I'm driving a red combine home. Silence on the line, long enough that Beckett checked to see if the call had dropped. Drive careful, Loretta said. Not approval, not permission. Just the acknowledgement of a woman who had been married to this man for 22 years and knew that when he made a voice like that, the decision was already moving, and her job was to make sure it didn't wreck them. Beckett drove the ideal 983 miles back to his farm that afternoon. He pulled it into the same field where the S780 had died 2 days earlier. The wheat was still standing golden and patient, waiting for a machine that worked. He opened it up. The first pass through the wheat told him something was different. The machine responded to the header height controls with a precision that felt almost intuitive, as if the combine was reading the terrain a half-second before Beckett's hands moved. The grain flowed into the tank clean and steady, and when he checked the first sample through the rear window, he saw kernels that were whole and golden, almost no cracking, almost no chaff. He had been farming wheat for 25 years, and he had never seen a grain sample come out of a combine looking like it had been hand-sorted. By the second hour, he stopped comparing. The Massey Ferguson was not a version of his Deere. It was a different philosophy built into metal and hydraulics. Where the S780 had always felt like it was managing its own complexity, compensating for the interaction between twin rotors and a threshing system that required constant calibration, the Ideal 9 felt simple, not primitive, simple the way a well-designed tool is simple. One rotor, one path for the grain, fewer places for things to go wrong. The cab was quieter than he expected. The steering was tighter. The air conditioning worked without the rattling duct that had plagued his S780 since its second season. By the fourth hour, he was pushing speeds he would never have attempted in the Deere. Not recklessly, confidently. The machine ate green stem wheat, the tough, fibrous stalks that plugged rotors and jammed concaves and turned good harvest days into mechanical nightmares without hesitation. No slugging, no bogging, just a steady, relentless appetite for standing grain. He ran it for 6 hours straight. 6 hours without a stumble, without a warning light, without a single moment where the machine felt like it was working against him instead of with him. When he shut it down at dusk, the grain cart behind him was full, and the field ahead of him was clean, and the feeling in his chest had a name now. It was freedom, and it terrified him. Because freedom meant choice, and choice meant leaving behind everything he had known. The green paint, the leaping deer, the dealership where his name hung on a bronze plaque, the man who had loaned him a tractor in 2018 and said, "Pay me back when I need something." All of it. Every relationship, Every history, every habit formed over 3 decades of doing business the same way with the same people. Beckett sat in the cab of the Ideal 9 as the sun went down, and the wheat field turned from gold to copper to shadow. And he understood that the next phone call he made would change everything. Not just his equipment, his standing in the community, his relationship with the Nordine family, his reputation at the co-op and the farm bureau and the bank and every other institution in McCook that ran on the assumption that loyalty once given was permanent. He called Virgil from the cab. "I want it." "You sure?" "Yeah, but I want more than that." Virgil paused. "I'm listening." "I want to replace my whole fleet." The silence on the line lasted 3 full seconds. "Say that again." "I'm done with Deere. I want Massey Ferguson tractors. I want another combine. I want everything you've got that can replace what I'm running." Virgil's voice shifted. The gravel was still there, but underneath it was something careful, serious. "Beckett, I don't know what happened between you and your Deere dealer, but switching an entire fleet is not something you do on emotion. That's a $2 million decision." "I know exactly what it is," Beckett said. "And I'm not doing it on emotion. I'm doing it because I just spent 6 hours in a machine that works better, costs less to run, and comes from a dealer who doesn't treat me like I should be grateful for the privilege of being his customer." Virgil exhaled. "All right, come back tomorrow. Let's build a plan." That night was the hardest conversation Beckett and Loretta had ever had at the kitchen table. Not because they yelled. They never yelled. Because Loretta opened the spreadsheet and showed him what $2 million of risk looked like when you laid it out row by row. "You want to sell $3.2 million in equipment," she said, her voice flat and precise in the way it got when she was scared and controlling the fear with numbers. "Buy it all back in a brand we've never run, in the middle of harvest season. You understand that if this goes wrong, we lose the farm." "I understand." "You understand that your father would never have done this." That one landed. Because it was true. Grady Ashford had lived and died in John Deere Green. He would have waited the 3 weeks. He would have rented the S760 at $315 an hour and swallowed the cost and gone back to Nordine equipment the next season like nothing happened. Because that was what you did. That was loyalty. "Dad also never got left hanging in the middle of harvest," Beckett said. Loretta looked at him for a long time. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cattle moving in the feedlot. "Give me 48 hours, she said. "Let me run the numbers." Those were the longest 48 hours of Beckett's farming life. Longer than the 26 hours he had waited for the technician to show up. Longer than the 3 to 6 weeks he had been told to wait for parts that would never come. Because during those 2 days the decision was alive, but unconfirmed, hanging in the space between impulse and commitment, and every hour that passed brought new doubts and new calculations and new conversations in his head with his father and his grandfather and every farmer he had ever known who had done the safe thing and survived, and every farmer he had ever heard of who had done the bold thing and lost. He did not call Virgil. He did not call Vance. He worked the farm. He finished cutting the wheat with the borrowed Ideal 9, and every hour he ran it, every clean grain sample, and every smooth pass through the field was another argument in favor of the decision he had already made, but had not yet been given permission to execute. The machine did not break down. The machine did not hesitate. The machine did exactly what Virgil had promised it would do, and the fact that it was a loaner, that it belonged to a dealer and not to Beckett, made the waiting worse, because he knew that at any moment Virgil could call and ask for it back, and then Beckett would be standing in a wheat field with no combine at all. Loretta during those 2 days did not sleep well. Beckett could hear her in the kitchen at midnight, the laptop open, the calculator app running her pen, scratching numbers on the legal pad. She was doing what she always did when the stakes were high. She was building a fortress out of data, a wall of numbers that would either protect them or confirm that they were walking off a cliff. 2 days later, Loretta came back with a 3-page spreadsheet. She had modeled best case, worst case, and most likely scenarios for the liquidation and repurchase. She had called equipment auction houses for current Deere resale values. She had priced every Massey Ferguson model Beckett wanted against the comparable Deere. "If you sell at the lowest end of what I'm projecting," she said, "and buy at the prices," Virgil quoted, "we're short 180,000. We'll have to borrow." "I'll tell," Virgil Beckett said. "I'm coming with you," Loretta said. That was the moment Beckett knew his wife was no longer fighting him. She had chosen to stand beside him even though she was afraid. Not because she believed the machines were better, because she believed in the math, and because she believed in the man sitting across from her who had never once made a decision this large without showing her the numbers first. But before Beckett could begin selling, before the first piece of green iron left his property, he got a visitor. Corbin Endicott, 67 years old, 1,200 acres to the west. A quiet man who kept to himself and farmed like his father had farmed, which was carefully, conservatively, and with deep suspicion of change. Corbin had done what Beckett was about to do. 10 years earlier, fed up with his Deere dealer for reasons that rhyme with Beckett's, Corbin had switched his entire operation to Case IH, bought new tractors, a new combine, committed fully. For 2 years it worked. Then the nearest Case IH dealer closed. Parts had to come from 200 miles away. Corbin lost an entire corn harvest waiting for a hydraulic pump that took 3 weeks to arrive. He sold everything, went back to Deere, and lost $120,000 in the round trip. Corbin came to Beckett's shop on a Tuesday evening, stood in the doorway with his cap in his hands, and said the thing nobody else was saying. "I want to tell you something that nobody's going to tell you. Year 1 is great. New machines, new dealer wants to prove himself. Year 2, it's normal. Year 3, that dealer treats you the same way Nordine does. Because that's how this industry works." Beckett looked at him. "Or because that's how you let it work." Corbin shook his head slowly. "I hope you're right, but I was right once too, and it hurt like hell." He put his cap back on and left. Beckett stood in the shop doorway and watched Corbin's taillights disappear down the gravel road, and he felt something he hadn't felt since the S-Woman 8. Oh, broke down, doubt, real doubt. Not the doubt of a man who doesn't know what he wants, but the doubt of a man who knows exactly what he wants and has just been told by someone he respects that wanting it might not be enough. He stood there for a long time. Then he went inside, sat down at the kitchen table across from Loretta and said, "Call Virgil. Tell him we're coming tomorrow." That night, driving home from town, Beckett passed Nordine Equipment. The showroom was lit up, green machines gleaming through the plate glass windows. The bronze plaque with his name still hanging in the lobby where Vance had put it 8 years ago. He did not stop. He did not slow down. But in the rearview mirror, just before the dealership disappeared behind him, he caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the back door. An old man, 78 years old, smoking a cigarette and looking out at the road. Beckett Nordine, the founder, the man who had driven a tractor to Grady Ashford's field at midnight in 1987 to fix a breakdown during harvest, because that was what you did for your people. Beckett and Barrett did not see each other. The distance was too far, the light too dim, the moment too brief. But Barrett would hear about what was coming, and when he did, his reaction would be nothing like his son's. The first machine to leave was the hardest, not because it was worth the most, not because it was the newest or the most capable. The first machine to leave Beckett Ashford's operation was a 2009 John Deere 8R tractor, the first piece of equipment he had ever purchased from Nordine Equipment on his own name, not his father's. It had 11,000 hours on it. The seat foam had compressed into the exact shape of Beckett's body over 14 years of field work. The steering wheel was worn smooth on the left side where his thumb rested during long passes through corn stubble. There was a scratch on the right fender from the time his son, who was 9, then and 23, now had backed a grain cart into it during his first attempt at helping with harvest. The buyer was a farmer from Sterling, Colorado. He arrived on a Tuesday morning with a flatbed trailer and a cashier's check for $62,000. Beckett watched him chain the 8R down, tighten the binders, and climb into his truck. When the trailer pulled out of the yard and turned east onto the highway, Loretta was standing beside Beckett. She took his hand. Neither of them said anything. Behind them, the wheat field where the S780 had broken down 3 weeks earlier was still half-cut, the standing grain starting to lean in the summer wind. Beckett felt like he was attending a funeral for a version of himself that had existed for a very long time and was now by his own choosing being lowered into the ground. Over the next 14 days, he did something no one in Red Willow County had ever witnessed. He liquidated every piece of John Deere equipment on his farm. All of it. The S780 with its destroyed transmission went to a custom cutter in Dodge City, Kansas, sold as is with full disclosure for $110,000. Half what it was worth running. Beckett did not negotiate. The S690 backup combine went to a dryland farmer near Ray, Colorado. The remaining 8R tractors, the 6M series, the 5 series utility units, the planters and sprayers, and grain carts, anything painted green and wearing the Leaping Deer logo, found a new home. Some went through auction houses in Grand Island and North Platte. Some through private sales arranged over the phone. Some to dealers 2 states away who were happy to take quality used Deere iron off a farmer who seemed to everyone watching to have lost his mind. Every piece sold fast, because even when the owner had lost faith in John Deere, the secondary market had not. Used Deere equipment held its value the way few other brands did in the rural Midwest, which was both the reason people stayed loyal and the reason it stung so much when that loyalty stopped being returned. Within 90 days, Beckett had cleared $2.7 million, and he spent nearly all of it at Heartland Iron and Kearney. The new fleet arrived in waves. 2 Massey Ferguson Ideal 9 combines red and silver, rolling off transport trailers and into his machine shed like a change of uniform. 3 MF8S 265 tractors, 2 7S mid-range units for loader work during hay season and cattle feeding, 1 5S utility tractor for the daily grind of moving equipment and handling feed. All of it Massey Ferguson red, all of it from Virgil Hollowell, all of it serviced by a dealer 83 miles away who had answered the phone on the first ring when Beckett called and had not stopped answering since. By mid-September, Beckett's machine shed looked like it had been repainted overnight. No green anywhere. Just red, and the quiet of a man waiting to find out if the biggest bet of his life was going to pay off or destroy him. The entire county noticed. Vance Nordine noticed most of all. The first sign of what was coming arrived in October, disguised as a phone call about a PTO shaft. Beckett had kept one John Deere machine, a 569 round baler, 10 years old, still functioning, not worth the hassle of replacing. He needed a PTO shaft for it, a routine part, the kind of thing any dealer should have on a shelf or could order overnight. He called Nordine Equipment. The parts desk put him on hold for 11 minutes. When the voice came back, it was clipped, short, the tone of someone following instructions they didn't write. That part's discontinued. We can't get it. Beckett frowned. It's a current production baler. How is the part discontinued? That's what the system shows. Can you check again? I did. It's not available. Beckett hung up and drove to the dealership the next morning. He walked into the parts department past the counter where he had stood hundreds of times over 15 years, ordering filters and belts and hydraulic fittings, and asked to speak to the manager. Rowan Pemberton came out from the back. 40 years old, stocky, a guy Beckett had known for 8 years. They had talked about fishing. They had talked about their kids' baseball games. Rowan came out with his arms crossed over his chest, and Beckett understood immediately that this conversation was going to be different from every conversation they had ever had before. "What can I do for you, Beckett?" "I need a PTO shaft for a 569 baler. Your guy on the phone told me it's discontinued." "I know that's not true." Rowan looked at his computer screen, clicked a few keys with the exaggerated patience of someone performing a task they have already completed and know the answer to. "Yeah, looks like we can get it, but it's special order now. 4-week lead time. 4 weeks for a PTO shaft. Supply chain issues, you know how it is." Beckett stared at him. "Rowan, I've bought parts from you for 15 years. You have never once made me wait 4 weeks for a shaft." Rowan shrugged. "Things change." Beckett held his gaze for a moment, reading what was behind the man's eyes. Then he turned to leave. He was halfway to the door when Rowan said something. Quiet, just loud enough to carry across the parts counter. "You made your bed. Now you lie in it." Beckett stopped, turned around. The two men looked at each other across 12 feet of concrete floor and a lifetime of transactions that had once felt like something more than transactions. Beckett wanted to say something sharp, something that would cut. But he looked at Rowan's face and saw something he didn't expect. Not anger, not contempt, fear. Rowan was afraid. Afraid that if he helped Beckett, if he processed the order normally, if he treated a former loyal customer the way Barrett Nordine would have treated him, Vance would find out, and there would be consequences. Rowan Pemberton was not Beckett's enemy. Rowan Pemberton was a man caught in the middle of someone else's war. Beckett walked out without a word. He called an AGCO parts supplier in Wichita from his truck. They had the shaft in stock. It arrived in 3 days. The retaliation did not stop at parts. 2 weeks later, Beckett tried to schedule a service appointment for the one remaining Deere machine, the baler, which needed a routine preseason inspection. The service desk told him 2 weeks. He asked about ordering a sales kit to do the work himself, not in stock. Could they overnight it? "We don't do rush orders anymore." Beckett did not call a third time. He found what he needed from a Deere dealer in Colby, Kansas, who had never heard of him and had no reason to treat him like anything other than a customer placing an order. The kit shipped same day. But the pattern was clear now, and Beckett stopped pretending it wasn't. Every interaction with Nordine equipment had become a small act of punishment. Phone calls went to voicemail. Service appointments got rescheduled to dates that were useless. Parts that should have been on shelves were suddenly special order, back ordered, discontinued, or lost in a system that had worked flawlessly for 15 years until Beckett committed the sin of buying red machines. At the co-op in McCook, Beckett started hearing the whispers. He would be filling up his fuel tank or loading feed supplements into his truck, and a voice would come from 2 aisles over or across the parking lot. "Heard you went full red. Vance Nordine's not happy. You really think those Massey Fergusons are going to hold up out here?" Beckett never responded, not because he didn't have answers, but because he understood that the whispers were not questions. They were tests. The community was watching to see if he would break, and his silence was the only answer that mattered. Everett Whitford was watching too, but Everett was watching differently. Everett was 50. We farmed 1,900 acres to the east, ran 2 Deere, 8 R tractors and an S790 combine, and had been a green loyalist his entire career. He was not the kind of man who talked about feelings or asked personal questions or showed up at your house uninvited. But in the weeks after Beckett's machine shed turned red, something shifted in Everett. Every time the two men met at the fence line between their properties, Everett's eyes would drift toward Beckett's yard, toward the row of red machines where green ones used to stand, and he would go quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. This was the quiet of a man doing math in his head and not sharing the results. One afternoon at the fence, Everett broke his silence with a single question. New machines running all right. Beckett nodded. Running. Everett drove off. But Beckett noticed something in the days that followed. Everett had started keeping track. How many days Beckett's combines ran. How many acres he finished. How long he spent at the fuel tank. Everett never asked directly. He just watched, like a scientist monitoring an experiment he hadn't designed but couldn't stop observing. November brought the moment that split the county in half. The Farm Bureau meeting was a monthly gathering. 30 men in a community center basement, folding chairs, a coffee pot that had been making the same burnt coffee since 1998, and an agenda that usually covered crop insurance updates, road maintenance complaints, and who was selling what at the county equipment auction. It was the kind of meeting where nothing happened and everything was communicated, where the real business was conducted in the pauses between agenda items, in the way men looked at each other or didn't. Vance Nordine was there. He sat on the opposite side of the room from Beckett. He did not nod. He did not acknowledge Beckett's presence. For the first 40 minutes, the meeting proceeded normally. Then during open discussion, Vance stood up. I just want to say something. There's been a lot of talk lately about brand loyalty, about who supports local businesses and who doesn't. The room went silent. Vance's voice was controlled, measured, the voice of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was delivering it exactly as planned. He did not look at Beckett, but every other person in the room did. We've been here for 50 years, Vance continued. We've supported this community. We financed guys when banks wouldn't touch them. We kept people running when parts were scarce and nobody else could get them. And I think it's worth remembering that loyalty is a two-way street. He sat down. The room stayed silent. Beckett felt 30 pairs of eyes on him like heat from 30 small fires. He did not stand. He did not defend himself. He drank his coffee and waited for the moment to pass. It did not pass, because Barrett Nordine stood up. The old man was at the back of the room. Nobody had expected him to speak. Barrett hadn't addressed a Farm Bureau meeting in 6 years. He moved slowly, the way 78-year-old men move when their knees have spent 50 years on concrete shop floors. But when he was standing, his voice was clear and steady and carried the weight of a man who had built something from nothing and understood exactly what it cost. I want to add one thing to what my son just said. Every head in the room turned. Vance is right about loyalty, but loyalty is not a right you own. It's something you earn every single day. And if we lose a customer, the first question is not why did he leave? The first question is, why did we let him leave? Barrett looked directly at his son, not with anger, with something worse, disappointment. The kind of disappointment that only a father can deliver, because it carries inside it the knowledge of exactly what he had built and exactly how his son had failed to maintain it. The room did not breathe. Vance's face went red, not because Beckett was watching, because his father had corrected him in front of every farmer in the county, because the old man who had taught him everything about the equipment business had just told the room that the lesson had not taken. Beckett looked at Barrett. The old man gave him a slight nod, not solidarity, not alliance, just acknowledgement. One man who understood what it meant to be let down by people who should have known better, and another man who understood what it meant to be the reason they were let down. The meeting ended. Nobody spoke to Beckett on the way out, but the message had landed on both sides. Vance Nordine was not just angry at Beckett, he was being held accountable by his own father. And Beckett Ashford was not just a man who had switched brands. He was the evidence of a failure that Barrett Nordine refused to ignore. December came, and with it, the test that had been waiting since Beckett signed the purchase orders in Kearney. Calving season preparation, sub-zero temperatures, equipment running nonstop in conditions that punished weakness in machines and men alike. The old-timers at the co-op reminded Beckett of what everyone was thinking. Those fancy red tractors work great in August. Let's see how they handle January when it's 12 below and the hydraulics turn to syrup. Beckett didn't argue. He prepped his machines. Synthetic fluids, block heaters, cold weather fuel additives, and then he waited for the cold. It arrived on December 9th, 6 degrees Fahrenheit at 5 in the morning. Beckett walked out to his shed in darkness, his breath visible in the beam of his headlamp, and climbed into the 8S265. He turned the key. The engine fired on the first crank. No hesitation, no slow starter, grinding against cold oil, just clean ignition and a smooth idle that settled into the pre-dawn silence like a heartbeat. He ran it for 3 hours, fed 240 head of cattle, moved big bales with the loader, operated hydraulics that responded without lag, without the sluggishness that cold brought to older systems. The tractor did not flinch. Beckett smiled for the first time in months. But before the winter could finish testing his machines, it tested something else: his financing. In early January, Beckett got a phone call from First National Bank of McCook. Heath Dillard, the loan officer who had handled Beckett's equipment financing since 2004, asked him to come in for a meeting. His voice was polite, professional, and carrying a tension that Beckett recognized immediately as the sound of a man doing something he had been told to do rather than something he wanted to do. Beckett walked into the bank on a Thursday morning. Loretta came with him. She had not been invited, but she brought her laptop, and the look on her face that Beckett knew meant she had already anticipated what this meeting was about and had prepared for it. Heath sat behind his desk with a manila folder open in front of him. Beckett, I wanted to talk about your equipment financing. You've got $340,000 outstanding on implements and machinery, and you recently liquidated your John Deere fleet and replaced it with Massey Ferguson equipment. Beckett's jaw tightened. I did. Well, we've had some concerns raised about resale value. Deere equipment holds its value significantly better in this region. If we ever had to, exercise our rights on the collateral, you're not going to repossess anything, Heath. I've never missed a payment in 19 years. I know that, but we have to consider asset depreciation on the collateral side. Massey Ferguson isn't as strong in the secondary market here. We'd like you to increase your collateral coverage by 15%. Beckett stared at him across the desk. The bank's walls were decorated with photos of McCook landmarks and framed certificates from community service awards. The air smelled like carpet cleaner and the faint sweetness of the candy dish on the reception desk. You want me to put up more collateral because I switched brands? Heath shifted in his seat. It's just a risk assessment, Beckett. Did Vance Nordine call you? Heath did not answer. But the way his eyes moved, the way they dropped to the folder and then back up, told Beckett everything he needed to know. Loretta opened her laptop. She had been sitting quietly, but now she leaned forward and turned the screen so Heath could see it. Heath, I have the maintenance and operating costs for our Deere fleet over the last 5 years side by side with the actual costs we've incurred in the first 6 months with Massey Ferguson. You want to talk about resale value, or do you want to talk about cash flow? Because cash flow is what determines whether we make our payments, not what a tractor sells for at auction if we go under, which we won't. Heath looked at the screen. He looked at Loretta. He looked at Beckett. Loretta continued, 19 years of on-time payments, not one late, not one missed. If you're changing terms on a 19-year customer because of a phone call from an equipment dealer, then we'll let Frontier Bank in Kearney decide whether our record is worth their business. The room was quiet. Heath closed the manila folder. Beckett stood up. "We're done here." They drove to Kearney that afternoon. Frontier Bank approved the refinance in 48 hours. Better interest rate, no collateral increase, no questions about what color the tractors were. When Heath called 2 days later to apologize, Beckett let it ring through to voicemail. On the drive home from Kearney, Loretta sat in the passenger seat with her laptop closed on her knees and her face turned toward the window. The highway stretched flat and straight through winter, stubble, the sky low and gray, the kind of January afternoon that made everything in Nebraska look like a black and white photograph. "You were good in there," Beckett said. Loretta didn't turn from the window. "I wasn't good. I was angry. There's a difference." Beckett glanced at her. In 22 years of marriage, he could count on one hand the number of times Loretta had raised her voice. She didn't need to. She had a way of lowering her voice and sharpening her words that was far more effective than volume. In the bank, she had been quiet and precise and devastating, and Heath Dillard had known within 30 seconds that he was outmatched. "Do you think Vance actually called him?" Loretta asked. "I know he did." "How do you know?" "Because Heath couldn't look at me when I asked." Loretta was quiet for a mile. Then she said something that Beckett would think about for a long time afterward. "What Vance doesn't understand is that he's not just losing your equipment business. He's losing the people who watch you. Everett is watching. Corbin is watching. Every farmer at that co-op is watching to see what happens to us. And if we survive this, Vance doesn't just lose one customer. He loses the argument that switching is too risky." Beckett looked at his wife. She was still facing the window, but he could see the set of her jaw and the tension in her shoulders, and he understood that Loretta was not just defending their finances. She was defending their right to make a decision without being punished for it by every institution in a small town that ran on relationships and unspoken agreements. They drove the rest of the way home in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had filled the kitchen the night Beckett sat up researching combines. That silence had been uncertainty. This one was resolve. But the real test came in February, calving season in full swing, 14-hour days, nights when the temperature dropped to 15 below, and the wind cut through coveralls like they were made of paper. Beckett's 7S tractor logged 340 hours in 30 days. Feeding, hauling, bedding, pulling calves in pasture corrals where traction and hydraulic power meant the difference between a live calf and a dead one. At 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in mid-February, during a blizzard that had closed the highways and knocked out power to half the county, Beckett got a call from his calving barn. A first calf heifer was in trouble. He pulled on his boots, drove the 7S through 18 inches of fresh snow to the pasture, hooked the calf puller to the tractor's 3-point hitch, and worked for 40 minutes in wind that burned every exposed inch of skin. The calf lived. The heifer lived. The tractor never slipped, never stalled, never lost hydraulic pressure in the cold. Beckett sat in the cab afterward, engine idling, heater blowing, his hands shaking. Not from the cold, from relief. He was remembering a night in 2019 when his Deere 60M had quit in the middle of a calving emergency. Dead battery, frozen fuel line, whatever it was, the machine would not start, and by the time he got another tractor running and made it to the pasture, 2 calves were dead. He had never told anyone about that night except Loretta. It was the kind of loss that didn't show up on a balance sheet but lived in your chest like a stone you carried everywhere. Sitting in the cab of the Massey Ferguson at 3 in the morning, calves alive, machine running, Beckett understood something that went beyond horsepower and fuel efficiency numbers. He had not just changed brands, he had changed the odds. And in cattle country in February, the odds were the only thing that mattered. When a hydraulic hose blew on the loader 2 weeks later, Beckett called Heartland Iron. They had the replacement in stock. He drove up, grabbed it, installed it himself in 40 minutes. No waiting, no voicemail, no 4-week lead time for a hose that every dealer should carry. Then came March, and the war expanded to a front Beckett had not anticipated. Planting prep meant seed fertilizer and crop protection chemicals. For 12 years, Beckett had bought all of it from Deere Agronomy, a sister company, to the equipment dealership run by Vance's younger brother, Leland. Leland was 41, quieter than Vance, the kind of man who kept his opinions behind his teeth and let business do the talking. Beckett called to place his annual order. Leland's voice was polite and empty. "Yeah, Beckett, we're a little tight on inventory this year. Not sure we can prioritize your acres." Beckett kept his voice level. "Leland, I've been buying from you since 2011. You've never had inventory issues before." "Well, things are different now. Suppliers are favoring long-term loyal customers." Beckett felt the sentence land. He let the silence stretch for 3 beats before he responded. "Leland, I didn't switch agronomy dealers. I switched equipment dealers. You're punishing me for a decision that has nothing to do with you." "I'm not punishing anyone. Just telling you the reality." Beckett understood then. The Nordine family was coordinating. Equipment parts, agronomy. Every door was closing, not because supply was short, because Beckett had broken the covenant, and the price of breaking it was being cut off from every service the Nordine name controlled in southwest Nebraska. He sat in his truck in the driveway for 10 minutes after hanging up staring at the steering wheel. He had expected retaliation from Vance. He had expected cold shoulders at the parts counter. He had even expected the bank to come calling. But he had not expected Leland. Leland was the quiet one. The one who had never been anything other than professional. The one whose business had nothing to do with what color the tractors were. Seed didn't care whether the planter pulling it was green or red. Fertilizer didn't know the difference. This was not a business decision. This was a family closing ranks, drawing a line, telling Beckett that the price of leaving one Nordine was leaving all of them. He thought about calling Loretta. Then he thought about what she would say. She would say what she always said when the numbers were against them. She would say, "Find another option." So he did. He drove 30 miles west to Landmark Cooperative in Holbrook. The manager there was a woman named Gail who had sold crop inputs for 20 years and did not know or care about Beckett's equipment decisions. She pulled up her inventory, took his order, quoted prices that were 7% lower than what Nordine Agronomy had charged the previous year, and had his truck loaded in 45 minutes. Beckett drove home with the windows down and the spring air coming through, and a feeling in his gut that was equal parts anger and liberation. Every supplier the Nordine family controlled had tried to squeeze him, and every time he had found an alternative that was equal to or better than what he had been paying for. The ecosystem that had felt like family for 15 years had turned out to be a fence, and Beckett had just discovered that the gate had been unlocked the whole time. He was done playing defense. April, spring planting. Beckett ran his 3.8S265 tractors through 2,100 acres of corn and soybeans in 17 days. The precision of the transmissions let him match planter speed to soil conditions on the fly. The hydraulics held depth control steady across variable ground where clay pockets met sandy loam, and the planter needed constant adjustment. He finished faster, used less fuel, and planted more acres per day than he had in any previous spring. His neighbor, Everett Whitford, running 2 Deere 8R tractors on 1,900 acres, finished in 19 days. Neither man said anything about it. But Everett stopped making jokes about red tractors. And one evening in late April, he did something he had never done before. He drove to Beckett's house. He stood on the porch with his cap in his hands, a posture Beckett recognized because Corbin Endicott had stood the same way in his shop doorway 3 months earlier. But Everett's face was different, not warning, searching. "I didn't come to ask about the red machines," Everett said. "I came because I want to know one thing." Beckett waited. "Are you scared?" "Scared of what?" "Scared that you're wrong. Scared that Corbin Endicott was right." The question hung in the evening air between them. Two men in their 50s who had farmed neighboring ground for 15 years and had never once talked about fear. "Every day," Beckett said, "every day I'm scared. But every day the machines start and run, the fear gets a little smaller." Everett nodded, slow and deliberate the way a man nods when he has received the answer he expected and is not yet sure what to do with it. He put his cap back on and drove home without another word. But Beckett knew Everett was counting days. If the Massey Fergusons survived the first full year without a catastrophe, Everett Whitford would be picking up the phone and calling Virgil Hollowell. Not because Beckett convinced him, because the evidence convinced him. And Everett was a man who trusted evidence the way other men trusted faith. May, the co-op in McCook. Beckett was filling his truck when Vance Nordine's pickup pulled in on the other side of the pumps. Vance stepped out, saw Beckett, and walked toward him with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who has something to say and is going to say it whether the other man wants to hear it or not. For a moment, neither spoke. The pumps hummed. A meadowlark sang from a fence post across the road. "You made your point," Vance said. "What point is that?" "That you don't need us." "I never said that. You're the one who decided I didn't matter anymore." Vance's jaw tightened. "You walked away from 30 years of relationship. My family sold to your family. We financed you when no one else would. You left me hanging." Beckett's voice did not rise, but it hardened. "I had a combine down in the middle of harvest, and you told me to wait 3 weeks. I couldn't wait. So I found someone who wouldn't make me." Vance took a step closer. His voice dropped. "My father says I handled it wrong. He says if it had been him, he'd have driven a machine out to your field in the middle of the night, the same way he did for your dad in '87. The words hit Beckett somewhere below the ribs. Not anger, something worse. Grief. Because Barrett was right. The version of Nordine equipment that Barrett had built, the version that drove machines to your field at midnight, because that was what you did for your people, that version no longer existed. Vance had inherited the name and the building and the inventory, but he had not inherited the instinct that made his father's handshake worth more than a contract. "And now you're running equipment nobody around here services," Vance said. "What happens when those Massey Fergusons break down and Heartland Iron can't get you parts?" "Then I'll deal with it. But at least I'll be dealing with a company that treats me like I'm worth their time." Vance shook his head. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," Beckett said. "But it'll be my regret, not yours." They stood there for another moment, two men who had once shared a softball diamond and a parts counter and a history that went back further than either of their careers. Then Vance walked back to his truck. Beckett went back to his pump. They did not speak again. And as Beckett drove home through the spring twilight, past fields that were greening with corn and soybeans and winter wheat starting to head, he heard Vance's voice in his head, repeating what Barrett had said. He'd have driven a machine out to your field in the middle of the night. Beckett would remember that sentence for a very long time. Not because it made him feel vindicated, because it made him feel the full weight of what had been lost, not just between himself and Nordine Equipment, but between a generation that answered the phone at midnight and a generation that let it ring. June 2024. 1 full year since the S780 transmission had torn itself apart in a wheat field north of the highway and set everything in motion. Beckett stood in his shop at dawn, coffee going cold in his hand, and looked at the machines that had carried his operation through 4 seasons. 2 ideal 9 combines with 680 hours between them. 0 breakdowns, 3.8S tractors with a combined service record so clean it barely filled a page. One hydraulic hose. One fuel filter housing's gasket. That was the entire repair history for 3 machines over 12 months of hard use. Two 7S tractors with 890 hours logged through the most punishing calving season in a decade. Not a single service call. Total maintenance cost for the year, $11,400. The previous year running Deere, he had spent $24,300. Fuel savings across the fleet came to $16,800. Downtime across all machines, all seasons, all conditions, essentially zero. He pulled out his phone and opened the accounting app Loretta had set up for him because he still couldn't navigate the desktop version without calling her for help. Net income for the 2024 crop year, $447,000, the best year he had ever recorded. Not because commodity prices were high, they were average. Not because yields had been exceptional, they were normal. Because his equipment worked. Because when something needed attention, the call was answered and the part was available, and the repair happened in hours, not weeks. Loretta found him standing there when she came out to check on the water heater in the shop. She looked at his face, then at the row of red machines, then back at his face. "You're doing that thing where you stand in here and stare at them like they're gonna disappear." Beckett half smiled. "Just thinking. Think inside where it's warm." I finished the year-end numbers last night. They sat at the kitchen table. Not a Sunday night, but the laptop was open and the spreadsheet was glowing, and the ritual was the same as it had been for 16 years. Except the numbers on the screen told a story that neither of them had dared to predict 12 months earlier. "You know which number impressed me most," Loretta said. "It's not the 447, it's zero. 0 days with a machine sitting in the shed waiting for a part. Last year we had 14 days of downtime with Deere. 14 days times the opportunity cost per acre, that's $31,000 that never showed up on an invoice but came straight out of our revenue." Beckett looked at her. He had known the downtime was costly. He had felt it every time a machine sat idle while he waited for Nordine equipment to return a call or schedule a technician or locate a part that should have been on a shelf. But he had never calculated the actual dollar amount. Loretta had, because that was what Loretta did. She found the money that was hiding in the gaps between what you spent and what you lost. $31,000, she said again. That's the real number. That's what loyalty to a dealer who didn't show up actually cost us. July brought wheat harvest for the second time with the Massey Ferguson fleet, and this time there was no anxiety in the cab, no wondering if the machines would hold, no waiting for the failure that Corbin Endicott had predicted. Beckett ran both Ideal 9 combines through his wheat at speeds he would not have attempted the previous July because he hadn't yet trusted the machines enough to push them. Now he did. 2,400 acres in 9 days, clean-cutting, minimal grain, lost fuel consumption that would have seemed like a misprint on a Deere spec sheet. Everett Whitford, running his Deere S790 on the adjacent ground, took 11 days for 1,900 acres. The evening Beckett finished, his phone rang. Everett's number. "I'm not calling to ask about the machines," Everett said. Same opening line as his porch visit 3 months ago, except this time the voice behind it was different. Decided, settled. "I'm calling, 'cause I want Virgil Hollowell's number." Silence on the line. Beckett could hear wind through Everett's truck window and the faint sound of a combine engine idling in the background. Everett had stopped his own harvest to make this call. "You sure?" Beckett said. "Corbin Endicott would tell you you're crazy." "Corbin switched because he was angry," Everett said. "I'm switching because of math. There's a difference." Beckett texted him Virgil's number. He did not celebrate. He did not feel vindicated. He felt the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been told he was making a mistake by almost everyone he knew and had watched month by month as the evidence built its own case without him having to say a word. The domino had started to fall, but July had one more thing to teach Beckett, and it arrived without warning on a Thursday afternoon in the form of a sound he recognized in his bones. He was running the second Ideal 9, the one he had purchased after the demo unit proved itself through a section of late wheat on the south end of his property. The grain was heavy, the straw was tough, and the machine was working hard. Then he heard it, a faint metallic rattle from the separation area, rhythmic and wrong, the kind of sound that every farmer who has ever operated a combine knows instinctively is the beginning of something bad. He shut the machine down immediately, climbed out, opened the access panels and listened to the silence where the rattle had been, as if the machine might confess what was wrong if he waited long enough. He couldn't see the problem, but he could feel it. Something in the rotor assembly, a bearing maybe, something that was going to get worse if he kept running and catastrophic if he ignored it. Beckett stood beside the combine in the July heat and felt Corbin Endicott's words rise up from wherever he had buried them. Year one is great. New machines, new dealer wants to prove himself. Year two, it's normal. Year three, that dealer treats you the same way. This was the moment. Not year three, but close enough. The machine had a problem. The question was not whether Virgil Hollowell could fix it. The question was whether Virgil Hollowell would show up the way he had promised to show up, or whether he would do what Vance Nordine had done and tell Beckett to wait. Beckett pulled out his phone and called Heartland Iron. Virgil answered on the second ring. Beckett described the sound. Metallic, rhythmic, separation area, probably a bearing on the rotor assembly. Virgil listened without interrupting, then said, "Hold on, let me check the warehouse." 2 minutes of silence, the longest 2 minutes of Beckett's year. He stood in the wheat stubble with the phone pressed to his ear and stared at the horizon and waited to find out if the man who had sold him $2 million worth of equipment was going to back up the promises he had made in a parking lot 13 months earlier. Virgil came back on the line. "Don't have it in Kearney, but I just got off with the regional warehouse in Kansas City. They've got the bearing. I'm putting a courier on it tonight. You'll have it by 7 tomorrow morning." Beckett didn't say anything for a moment. "You still there?" Virgil said. "Still here." "Good. Don't run that machine again tonight. Use the other one if you need to keep cutting. And Beckett, this is what we do. This is why you're here." Beckett hung up. His hands were trembling slightly, and it had nothing to do with the heat. It was the release of a fear he had been carrying for 13 months, without admitting it to anyone, the fear that Corbin Endicott was right, that all dealers eventually become the same, that the red paint was just a different color of the same disappointment. At 6:45 the next morning, the courier van pulled into Beckett's driveway. Beckett was already in the shed, coffee in one hand, toolbox open on the workbench, the access panels of the Ideal 9 removed and waiting. He had been up since 4:30, not because he needed to be, because he could not sleep, because the bearing was either going to be on that van or it was not, and if it was not, then everything Corbin Endicott had warned him about was true. And the 13 months he had spent building a new life on new machines had been built on nothing more than a first-year honeymoon that was now ending the way honeymoons always end. The driver stepped out, walked to the passenger side, and pulled a box from the seat. Small, heavy for its size. Beckett took it, opened it, and looked at the bearing inside. Clean steel precision machine packed in grease and wrapped in protective paper. A part worth maybe $200. A part that represented something worth infinitely more. He had it installed by 9. The work was straightforward, but he took his time checking and rechecking because this was not just a repair. This was proof. By noon, both Ideal 9 combines were running side by side through the south section, the rattle gone, the wheat falling steady and clean, the machines working the way machines are supposed to work when they are built well and supported by people who understand that a farmer's season does not pause for inventory shortages. Loretta had come out to the field to watch. She stood on the truck tailgate at the edge of the section and watched both combines make their passes red and silver against golden wheat moving in tandem, like a pair of animals that had learned each other's rhythm. When Beckett pulled up at the end of a pass and opened the cab door, she said one word. "Working, working." She nodded, went back to the house. But Beckett saw her face before she turned, and what he saw there was not relief. It was something closer to pride. The pride of a woman who had bet on the numbers and the numbers had held. That evening, Beckett called Virgil to tell him the repair was done. "Appreciate the fast turnaround," Beckett said. Virgil was quiet for a beat. Then he said something that stayed with Beckett longer than any sales pitch ever could. "You know how many of my customers have called me in a panic this month? 11. You know how many of them had to wait more than 24 hours for a part 0. That's not because I'm special, Beckett. It's because I decided a long time ago that the only thing I sell that matters is the phone call after the sale. The machine gets you in the door. The service keeps you in the family." Beckett thought about the bronze plaque in the Nordine showroom with his name on it. He thought about Vance's voice saying this place doesn't exist without guys like you. He thought about how those words had felt like an honor at the time and how they felt now like a receipt for something that had been purchased but never delivered. August, Virgil texted Beckett on a Wednesday afternoon. "Got a guy 2 counties over asking about switching his fleet. Gave him your number, hope that's cool." Beckett called Hollis Bridwell that night. Hollis was 38, farmed 1,800 acres of wheat in Milo, ran a full Deere fleet, and had been thinking about switching for 2 years, but had never pulled the trigger because everyone he knew told him it was a bad idea. They talked for an hour. Beckett answered every question honestly: the costs, the process, the social fallout, the moments of doubt, the math that eventually silenced the doubt. Hollis didn't ask about horsepower or grain tank capacity. He asked the questions that mattered. "How did your wife handle it?" Beckett laughed. It was the first time he had laughed during a conversation about his fleet change. "She ran the numbers before I ran the machines. If the spreadsheet hadn't worked, I'd still be running green." "My wife's an accountant too," Hollis said. "Then you'll be fine." At the end of the call, Hollis asked the question, "Did you ever regret it?" Beckett thought about the dealers who stopped returning his calls, the bank that had questioned his collateral, the neighbors who had waited for him to fail, the whispers at the co-op, the Farm Bureau meeting where Vance had tried to shame him and Barrett had shamed Vance instead, the bronze plaque in a showroom he would never walk into again, the night at the kitchen table with the beer he didn't drink and the laptop screen glowing with videos of red machines cutting through fields on the other side of the world. And then he thought about the bearing that arrived at 6:45 in the morning, the calf that lived at 3 a.m. in a February blizzard, the spreadsheet that showed 0 days of downtime, the wife who stood up in a banker's office and defended their decision with numbers that could not be argued with, the neighbor who stopped making jokes and started asking for phone numbers. "No," Beckett said, "not once." The last week of August, Beckett saw Corbin Endicott at the co-op. He had been expecting this encounter for months, had rehearsed in his mind what he would say when Corbin delivered either an "I told you so" or a grudging admission that Beckett had been right. Corbin delivered neither. "I was wrong," Corbin said. He was standing by the seed bins with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face carrying the expression of a man who had spent a long time thinking about something and had arrived at a conclusion he didn't entirely enjoy. Or more accurately, I was right about my experience, but I was wrong to assume my experience was the only one that existed. Beckett looked at him. You weren't completely wrong, Corbin. If Heartland Iron closed tomorrow, I'd be standing right where you stood 10 years ago. Corbin nodded slowly. It's not the machines, it's the dealer. You found a good one. I didn't have that luck. The two men stood in the gravel lot of the co-op, dust drifting past them from a truck pulling out onto the highway, and let the silence do what silence does between men who have known each other for decades and have finally arrived at a place of mutual understanding. Corbin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper folded twice. He held it out. Beckett took it, unfolded it, and looked at it. It was a list, handwritten in pencil. 3 columns, machine-type hours, logged repair costs. Corbin's own data from his 2 years running Case OH 10 years ago. The numbers were neat and precise, the handwriting of a man who kept records the way his generation kept records on paper and pencil in a pocket notebook that went everywhere. I kept those numbers, Corbin said. Carried them for 10 years because I wanted to remember what it cost to be wrong. He paused. But I'm starting to think what it costs to be wrong is not the same as what it costs to be afraid of being wrong again. Beckett looked at the paper, at the careful columns, at the evidence of a mistake that Corbin had been carrying like a pebble in his boot for a decade. He folded it and handed it back. Keep it, he said, but maybe add a 4th column. What column? What it costs to stay? Corbin took the paper back, looked at it, then looked at Beckett with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Give me Virgil's number, Corbin said. You serious? No, but I want to have it in case I ever am. Beckett smiled. Corbin smiled. For the first time in 16 months, the weight of this whole thing felt lighter. September 2024. Beckett was combining corn on a clear afternoon when he saw the truck pull into his driveway. He recognized it before it stopped. White Ford F250 Nordine equipment logo on the door dent in the rear quarter panel from a fender bender in the dealership lot 3 years ago. Vance Nordine. Beckett shut down the combine and climbed out. The corn was standing tall around him, 8 feet of green and gold, the rows disappearing into the distance like lines drawn toward a vanishing point. Vance walked toward him across the stubble of the harvested rows, hands in his pockets, boots kicking up dust, his face carrying an expression Beckett had never seen on him before. Not anger, not resentment, something that looked from a distance like the face of a man who had lost an argument with himself and had finally accepted the terms. I'm not here to fight, Vance said. Beckett nodded. All right, I'm here because I want to say something I should have said a year ago. Vance took a breath. The corn rustled around them. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead riding a thermal, watching the combine scare up mice from the rows. You were right, we didn't treat you the way we should have, and we lost you because of it. Beckett did not respond. He stood with his arms at his sides and let Vance talk because he understood that this moment had been building for 15 months and that interrupting it would rob it of the gravity it deserved. I'm not asking you to come back, Vance continued. I know that's not happening, but I wanted you to know that we've changed some things. Response times, parts inventory, how we handle guys when they're in a jam. Because watching you leave made us realize we'd gotten comfortable. We were so used to being the only option that we forgot what it felt like to have to earn the business. Beckett studied him. The afternoon sun was behind Vance, casting his face in partial shadow, and for a moment Beckett saw something in the younger man's posture that reminded him of Barrett. The way Barrett used to stand in the shop doorway at the end of a long day, tired, but present, the weight of the business on his shoulders, but his feet still planted. Why are you telling me this? Beckett asked. Because you're not the first guy who thought about switching. You're just the first one who actually did it, and I don't want to lose anyone else the way we lost you. Vance paused, looked down at his boots, then back up. And because my father made me come. Beckett's eyebrows went up. Barrett, he said Grady Ashford's boy should never have had to call twice. If you don't drive out there and apologize, you don't deserve to run this dealership. The words landed in Beckett's chest like something heavy and warm, not because Vance was apologizing. Vance's apology was earned and expected, and Beckett received it with the respect it was due. But because Barrett, the old man who had built everything from nothing, was still holding the standard, 78 years old and still refusing to let the thing he created become less than what he intended, still demanding that the handshake mean something. Beckett felt his eyes get hot. He blinked it away. Corn rustled. The hawk circled. Vance extended his hand. Beckett took it. The handshake lasted 3 seconds, firm and steady, the grip of two men who understood that what had broken between them was not going to be repaired by a single conversation, but that the conversation was necessary anyway, because some things need to be said out loud before they can be put down. Vance walked back to his truck. Beckett watched him go. When the white F-250 turned onto the highway and disappeared behind the corn, Beckett stood alone in the field for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and called Loretta. Vance Nordine just came by. Silence, then carefully, what did he say? He apologized. A longer silence. Beckett could hear the kitchen in the background. Water running, a cabinet closing, the sounds of the life they had built together, the life that had nearly been upended by a transmission failure and a phone call that wasn't returned fast enough. Are you okay? Loretta asked. Yeah, really. Beckett looked at the rows of corn stretching to the horizon, the red combine standing in the cut rows like a monument to the year he had just survived, the sky going amber in the west as the sun dropped toward the plains. For the first time in a year, he said, yeah, really. The next morning, Beckett drove past Nordine Equipment on his way to the feed store. He slowed down not to stop, but because something caught his eye. The showroom window that used to display the newest combines and tractors in polished rows now had a banner across the glass. Under new management policies, we listen, we deliver, we earn your business. Below the banner, smaller text, same-day parts guarantee on all in-stock items. Beckett read it twice, then he drove on. But something about that banner stayed with him all day, not as vindication, but as proof that the ripple he had started was still moving. Vance Nordine had not just apologized. He had changed the way his dealership operated, not because he wanted to, because he had to. Because one farmer in a county of 300 had demonstrated that the alternative existed and that the alternative worked. At the feed store, Beckett ran into Everett Whitford. Everett was loading mineral blocks into the bed of his truck, and he nodded at Beckett with the economy of movement that defined everything Everett did. Saw Vance put up a new banner at the dealership, Everett said. I saw it. You think he means it? Beckett thought about that for a moment. I think his father means it, and I think Vance is smart enough to know he doesn't have a choice anymore. Everett loaded the last block and closed his tailgate. Virgil's coming out next week to look at my operation. We're talking about the 8S line. Beckett nodded. He didn't say good or about time or I told you so. He just nodded the way men nod when something has been decided and the decision speaks for itself. You know what convinced me, Everett said. It wasn't the speed, it wasn't the fuel numbers, it was that bearing, the one that showed up at 6:45 in the morning. Beckett looked at him. I was combining that day too, Everett said. I watched the courier van pull into your driveway from my cab. I timed it, 13 hours from your phone call to the part in your hand. I called Nordine Equipment last month for a hydraulic fitting that should be a shelf item. Took 4 days. 4 days for a fitting. Everett shook his head. That's when I stopped doing math and started making phone calls. He climbed into his truck and drove off. Beckett stood in the feed store parking lot and watched him go and felt something he hadn't felt in 16 months of fighting and doubting and proving and waiting. He felt finished, not finished with farming, finished with the argument. The evidence had spoken, the machines had spoken, the numbers had spoken, and now the neighbors were speaking one by one, not because Beckett had convinced them, but because the truth has a way of convincing people all by itself when you give it enough time. October passed quietly. The operation ran the way operations are supposed to run when the equipment works and the dealer answers and the farmer can focus on farming instead of fighting. 2 combines, 5 tractors, all Massey Ferguson red. Beckett was not proving anything to anyone anymore. He was not fighting Vance Nordine or the doubt that Corbin Endicott had planted or the fear that Everett Whitford had named. He was just farming, doing the work that his grandfather had started and his father had continued, and he had expanded into something that would, if the next generation wanted it, be there for them too. On a Sunday evening in late October, Beckett and Loretta sat at the kitchen table for their weekly session. The spreadsheet was open. The numbers were entered. Loretta closed the laptop and looked at him. "I want to tell you something I should have told you a year ago," she said. Beckett waited. "When you sat at this table that night, with the beer you didn't drink and the laptop open to those Massey Ferguson videos, I thought you had lost your mind. I thought the transmission blowing up had broken something in you, and that you were going to make a decision out of anger that would cost us everything we had built. I went to bed that night, and I lay there in the dark, and I calculated what it would take to start over if we lost the farm. I had a number, $280,000 in 7 years. That's what I thought it would cost to rebuild from nothing if you were wrong." Beckett stared at her. "You never told me that." "No, because the next morning when you were on the phone with Virgil, I watched your face, and I realized you hadn't lost your mind. You had found it. You were thinking more clearly than I had ever seen you think. And I decided that if the man who had shown me the numbers every Sunday for 16 years was making a decision this big, then the numbers were in his head, even if he hadn't put them on paper yet." Beckett reached across the table and took her hand. They sat like that for a while in the kitchen, where every major decision of their farming life had been made while the refrigerator hummed and the cattle moved in the feedlot, and the machines sat in the shed outside red and silver and quiet and ready for whatever came next. In November, Beckett drove to Kearney to pick up a set of filters from Heartland Iron. Virgil was in his office boots on the desk, phone to his ear, the same way he had been sitting the first time Beckett saw him. When he spotted Beckett through the glass, he held up one finger, finished the call, and walked out. "Hollis Bridwell just saying," Virgil said. "Full fleet, 2 ideals, 4 8S tractors. He starts taking delivery next month." Beckett nodded. "Good for him." "Good for you. You're the one who convinced him." "I didn't convince anyone. I just told the truth." Virgil looked at him with the expression of a man who has been selling equipment for 30 years and has learned that the most effective salespeople are not the ones with the best pitches, but the ones who let their results do the talking. "That's the most effective kind of convincing there is," Virgil said. Beckett picked up his filters, paid the counter, drove home. The whole transaction took 20 minutes. No drama, no waiting, no phone calls that went to voicemail, or parts that were mysteriously discontinued, or service appointments that got pushed to dates that didn't matter. He called, they had it, he picked it up, he left. That was all he had ever wanted. That was all any farmer had ever wanted. To be treated like a customer whose business mattered enough to answer the phone for. The drive home took an hour and 20 minutes through flat Nebraska highway, the fields on either side brown with harvested stubble, the sky enormous and pale with the last light of a November afternoon. Beckett drove with the window cracked and the radio off, listening to the wind and the tires and the engine of a truck, that was carrying him back to a farm that looked different than it had 18 months ago, but felt for the first time in a long time like exactly the right place. Halfway home, he passed a field where a young farmer he didn't recognize was running a green combine through late-season milo. The machine was moving well, cutting clean the grain cart, keeping pace alongside it. Beckett watched it for a moment in his mirror and felt no resentment, no satisfaction, no need to compare. It was just a farmer running a combine, a man doing his work with the tools he had chosen. Beckett had made a different choice, and the choice had cost him friendships and sleep and $147,000 in depreciation on equipment he sold at the bottom of a panic. But it had also given him something he had not known he was missing until he found it. The knowledge that his operation did not depend on any single dealer's goodwill, that his livelihood was not hostage to a relationship that could be withdrawn as punishment for disloyalty, that he was for the first time in his farming career genuinely free to succeed or fail on his own terms. The green combine disappeared behind a rise in the road. Beckett drove on. Beckett Ashford did not switch to Massey Ferguson to make a statement. He did not do it to punish Vance Nordine or to vindicate Corbin Endicott's mistake, or to prove Everett Whitford's math, or to give Virgil Hollowell a customer to brag about. He switched because a combine broke down on the best harvest day of the year, and the people who were supposed to help him told him to wait, and he could not afford to wait, so he found someone who would not make him. And in doing so, he learned something that cost him $2.7 million and a lifetime of green loyalty and a bronze plaque in a showroom he would never enter again. He learned that the brand on the side of your tractor does not matter as much as the person who answers the phone when it breaks. That the legacy you inherit does not matter as much as the operation you can sustain. That sometimes the most expensive decision you can make is staying loyal to something that stopped being loyal to you. And that the person who stands beside you when you burn every bridge behind you, the one who opens the spreadsheet and runs the numbers and says, "I'm coming with you," even though she's terrified, that person is the only legacy that counts. Loretta was standing at the door of the machine shed when Beckett pulled in from his last field day of the season. The light was fading. The machines were parked in their row, red and silver, clean and quiet. She didn't say anything. She just held out a bottle of beer. Beckett looked at it, recognized it. It was the same brand he had set on the kitchen table the night he sat up until 2 in the morning, researching combines he had never heard of the night. Everything started. The night the beer went untouched because he was too focused on what he was about to do to drink it. He took it from her hand, twisted the cap, and drank. It tasted the way the end of something hard is supposed to taste. Not like victory, not like vindication, like a man standing next to his wife in front of a shed full of machines that worked on land that his grandfather broke and his father expanded, and he had fought to keep on a November evening in Nebraska where the sky was wide and the wind was cold, and the only loyalty that paid was the kind you could feel in your hands. Beckett Ashford runs Massey Ferguson now, not because it's red, because it runs, and because when he calls his dealer, they pick up. That's the only loyalty that pays.